if say they don't agree and you know that and you go into it like, I'm going to be your Christian friend or whatever, you're actually seeing them as a project, not a person.
Yeah.
So we need to see them as an image bearer, as somebody that we can befriend. Until we have those conversations, you and I are tracking. We love the same song. Let's go do trivia.
Well, friends, here we are for this week's culture segment. I get to introduce you to a new friend. She's the author of Get Over Here, a singles guide to building meaningful community. Her name is Melissa Zaldivar. Melissa, welcome to the Boundless Show.
So glad to be here with you guys.
Well, this is really fun for us. And of course, anytime we see a book title that anywhere on the front of it has the word single or singleness or whatever, we're like, oh my goodness, because we're largely a young adult audience. And so we get to encourage them, as many of them are single and or hopeful for marriage. And what does that look like? And the idea of community, I love talking about community because especially with our audience, I feel it's like you talk to boomers and they're just like, we need to do this. What does this look like? Whereas younger adults are already years ahead on this. They're like, yeah, this is terrible. No one does it well. You have to be intentional. Yeah. We're all addicted to technology, so that needs to change. And so I think it's really great. Now talk about your experience of, obviously it informed why you wrote the book, but what your experience in lack of community, awkward community, kind of what happened maybe over various junctures of your life that you were like, oh my goodness, this is a thing, and actually bears, the necessity of writing about it.
Yeah, community has been part of my life for most of my life in some way, right? So when it comes to my experience, I grew up in a church. And so, there were other people around. There were other women pouring into my life outside of just my mom. And so because of this, I kind of had this vision early for what it could look like to have a community of other people, especially Christian people that have shared values and beliefs, and what that looks like in day-to-day life. And when you have something that you are in need of, you help one another out. And when you have something to celebrate, you celebrate with one another. And so that was sort of written in from an early age, as far as the very rare realization that community is necessary, that I realized as I got older. Not everyone had that experience. Some people have church hurt. Some people didn't grow up in a church. Some people have had really painful friendship breakups or whatever. And so because of this, I realized, oh, this is something that I want to be really careful and intentional to preserve because it's so special. And as I have moved into my 20s and now well into my 30s, I'm 36, I'm realizing that those people actually become sort of a chosen family in a way. And so I live on the other side of the country from my family, but even if I lived near them, I would need someone that I was doing life with, that I was committed to, that I was able to walk alongside outside my immediate family. And so the church has become that for me, and these friendships have become that. And I think as a result of that, very naturally, I've kind of organically grown this community that people have said over the years, like, oh, that's really interesting that you have a friend who works at an antique store and you just go hang out there after work one day, or, you bring a friend coffee in this place, or they bring you dinner when you get wrist surgery, whatever it is. I realized I think people might need a guide on how to do this well. And I want to really steward the opportunity to do that because I think community has literally changed my life.
Yeah. So I think it's often true, especially as we talk to people in the church who say are married, where they kind of err on the side of being assumptive of, oh, well, good thing I'm married because now I just have my spouse. And of course, then we're going to have these kids. And so they're loading up the minivan after church. And it's just, and then they get 10 years into that, jig. And they're like, okay, maybe this isn't all it's cracked up to be. And we need to look elsewhere for additional community. But what would you say are some of the challenges specifically for singles? Because I know I've felt, as someone who's single, sometimes you can feel like an appendage, or that you're just glomming onto people, or can you please invite me into your family? And I think it's easy for singles, maybe with a negative mindset, to feel like a project or feel like someone that, needs to be enfolded. How do we fight that stereotype?
I think a lot of that, honestly, is recognizing that God has put people in our lives for a reason and that there's, first of all, no shame in asking for help. Scripture is full of community, the people of God, right? Israel is a nation. Like, we are put into groups of people on purpose. And so I think sometimes we're like, well, I don't want to ask for help, or I don't want to be pathetic or the sad third wheel or something like that. But when we step back and anchor ourselves in truth, we go, wait a minute, I was designed to do this. And therefore, when I do feel lonely, or I do feel like, man, I wish that I could just have someone to share a meal with, for example, and I reach out to a friend, it's not a sad, pathetic thing. It's something that I recognize I was wired for. And so I think that's a really big piece is asking the question, are you struggling because you believe that you're just being, a pain in people's neck and you're just someone that's there and they all feel bad for? And I think sometimes that posture has to do with how you see yourself in light of the identity God has given you of belonging to a community. But when you say I'm part of the community and you get to give and receive, all of a sudden it doesn't feel like a burden anymore, because when I say to a friend, oh my goodness, I really could use help right now because I'm overwhelmed by this task, or I just need to talk to someone, or hey, do you want to go and grab lunch so that I can, hear about your life? It doesn't feel forced, because maybe I'm also reaching out to them saying, how can I help you this week? Or what do you need? How can I be praying for you? And so I think the two-way street of it all really helps us to remember that. But ultimately, we have to anchor on the reality of we do these things not because they're nice to do or they make our lives extra great, but because it's actually necessary, and how God wired us.
Yeah. So it's interesting. We're actually spending a couple weeks here talking about community, and we're going to be talking to a couple guys who are going to talk about the uniqueness of building community as men and with men. But I think for women, it's funny because, again, we're talking about stereotypes. So many guys who are listening right now are going to say, well, yeah, like for women, this is so easy because you have so many contexts in which you can meet people and you're all just so naturally friendly. And again, they're going to make all these assumptions. And I would say, I've certainly been in a church setting or a small group setting where maybe you join a women's Bible study and you're in that thing for a solid year or two and you never feel like you're really going deeper. It's just pleasantries. It's taking in information from scripture. It's filling in the blanks and answering the questions. What does it look like, Melissa, for women in particular to go deeper in friendship? How do you cross that bridge of just that level 1, level 2 into without, I guess you could just say, tell me about all your sin struggles or whatever, but what could this look like in a realistic way to really make that entree into this is getting real?
Yeah. And in a healthy way is kind of what I hear you saying, is how do we do this in a way that isn't like, hi, I have a clipboard with 1,000 questions and this is how we will become friends.
Yeah. Or here's all my brokenness in myriad ways. Please fix it for me. Yeah.
Exactly. You know what I think it starts with is small things. I think it starts with being intentional. So one of the things that I've started to do is, if I meet someone new at church and I've seen them around, but we've never actually had a conversation, I'll go up to them maybe during the greeting time or afterward, and I say to them, hey, I haven't met you yet. What's your name? Blah, 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 blah. And then when I get to know them a little bit, I'll be like, well, hey, I'd love to grab coffee sometime. Can I get your number? Now, we might not get coffee that week. It might take some time. We might have to figure things out. But now I have a contact. And when they pop into my head in a few weeks, I can reach out to them and say, hey, I was just thinking about you. How's it going? And just starting a conversation. Sometimes we stunt our relationships because we don't have an intentional posture going into it. And so while that person that I meet on a random Sunday, I have plenty of phone numbers in my phone of people that we just never really got together. But there are also plenty of people that when they came to mind, or I read in the church bulletin that they lost their parent or something like that, I said, oh, I immediately have their information. So I think one thing is be a little bit weird and say, hey, I would love to connect. How do I connect with you, right? And it could be exchanging social media information or a phone number, but something to just say, hey, I'm taking an interest in getting to know you. I think going first is something that's really hard to do because it's easy to tell yourself that you're being a burden conversation. Or I think that sometimes we kind of talk ourselves out of it beforehand. We think, oh, I don't want them to actually get to know me. I don't want to bother them, things like that. And I think we talk ourselves out of community before it even starts. So I say, start with something small, reach out, ask how they're doing, and then as the Lord brings them to mind, you can reach out. Now, that sounds exhausting. I'm not saying that you should make friends with everybody and constantly have your entire calendar full of new friendships, but I think that friendships don't grow unless you plant the seed. So my encouragement is plant the seed, be intentional and go first, and then see what grows.
Yeah. Also, kind of on the theme of challenging relationships or maybe stepping out of your comfort zone, do you have any examples, maybe from your own life or even advice of what it looks like to look at maybe something where someone is different from you? So, for example, I think like attracts like. We gravitate toward those people that we're like, oh, there's a mirror image of me, and so I know I'll get along with them. But what about women maybe in your sphere who are of another generation or culturally different or have different viewpoints than you on certain things, whether that is, cultural issues or politics or whatever? How do we bridge that divide in a way that really kind of can make a difference for relationships in general?
The first thing that comes into my mind is striking up conversation with someone before you really, really know them. So, for example, I have a dear friend here. I've known her for several years. And the way we met was probably about 5 years ago. We were both waiting in line at the same time at CVS. And a song came on the overhead speaker. And it was the song that's the opening to a movie I really love. And I said to her, do you know what movie this song is from? And she immediately knew the answer. And I said, oh, like, you're my type of person. And we have completely different upbringings. We have completely different worldviews. But at the same time, that little moment sparked a conversation, which then led to us talking about something and saying, oh, we live in a town right next to each other. And I just said to her, hey, would you ever want to, connect or something like that? And so we exchanged social media information. We followed each other on social media for like 3 years. And one day she posted something on her Instagram about going to trivia night at a local establishment, restaurant. And I thought, you know what? I really enjoy trivia. That's fun. And I just commented on it. And I said, that's so fun. I didn't know they did trivia there. And now every Thursday we go to trivia together and we have built this relationship. And I just think I don't even need to know about you. I think sometimes we're like, I'm gonna suss out what are all the things that you think, and do we align? And we overthink if somebody is going to align with us or something like that. But the thing we need to remember is we have no idea what the Lord's going to do with that relationship. We have no idea, and we certainly can't control it. So I say, like, go for it, get to know someone, throw it out there and see what happens. I think a lot of my community building experience has been throw it out there, see what happens. But looking at a person as a human being before deciding if we agree or not, I think sometimes allows for a better conversation, because if, say, they don't agree and you know that, and you go into it like, I'm going to be your Christian friend or whatever, you're actually seeing them as a project, not a person.
Yeah.
So if the Lord has built us for healthy relationships, then we need to see them as an image bearer, as somebody that we can befriend. And therefore, we should just start in the beginning, assuming that until we have those conversations, you and I are tracking. We love the same song. Let's go do trivia.
Yeah. Well, we know for a fact that even from scriptural examples, that, even Jesus himself, he couldn't be at the same relational level with everyone at the same time. So there were the 500, he had the 12, he had the 3 within the 12, and then obviously he had a relationship with the Father directly. What does that look like for you to set, maybe whether that's boundaries or establish that, that next coffee date, that next conversation? You can't, certainly you can't be everyone's personal therapist, because that's just not healthy in general. That's not community.
No.
That is like, you need
That's
to get some paid help.
codependency.
Yeah, let's go. Yeah, exactly. So there might be times when maybe something's not vibing and you might need to realize like, hey, it might be time to move on, or there's something where, you can't be everything to everyone. How do you make those discerning calls in terms of the level of relationship, or when it's time to maybe a relationship has run its course for that time and space?
I call this the friends who kind of fall through the cracks, right? It wasn't like you sometimes even had a conversation, you just naturally grew apart. this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, because as I have been in a different role at work, and as I've had different rhythms, as I've lived in different apartments, people just sort of fall by the wayside at times, and that can be really hard. I once read a book that described friendships as annuals and perennials. Annuals are the things that you have to plant every single year, and then they die, and then that's it. But perennials are things like, for example, irises, that they have a bulb, and they grow and they flourish and they bloom and then they die. But then the following year, they will grow again. So a perennial would be like an oak tree, right? It's forever, it's all the time. And an annual would be something, like, oh, I have, if I think about it from like a plant perspective or whatever, right? Like an annual is something that only grows seasonally. Like you think about like mums, right? And then once they're done, they're done. So what I would encourage is stepping into our relationships, recognizing the Lord has these people for me for a season. I do not know. I cannot control how long it's going to be, but to trust that whatever it is, whether it's we just have this one interaction or we have several years together or a lifetime together, to say, Lord, I'm going to treat this person like they are an honor to befriend, and I'm going to show up for them in the ways that I can and that I have capacity to show up well. I think sometimes we hit a bunch of relationships all at once and we kind of half-heartedly do it. And in doing that, we have all these shallow friendships, when really, I think, to your point, going deep and saying, who are my perennial friends? Who are the people that are season to season to season? Making sure I check in with them first, making sure I prioritize them, but also constantly asking the Lord, who do you have for me this week? A friend of mine told me the other day that every week she and her husband sit down and talk through the week, talk through the appointments they have or the commitments they have. But then they also say, who are 3 people that we could reach out to this week and just check in with, that the Lord has put in our heart? And so I think a lot of it is just holding it loosely and saying, I cannot control whether this is an annual or a perennial friendship, but I can trust that the Lord is going to bring people to mind. And ultimately, if I feel like, oh, but what if I don't reach out and then they get upset and then they get, entrusting them to the Lord and saying the Lord will meet their need, and you can't save everyone and you can't be the therapist, like you said, for everyone. So saying, how can I befriend these people, and asking the Lord for wisdom.
Yeah, that's cool. I do want to mention that the structure of the book, and again, we're talking about Get Over Here, a singles guide to building meaningful community, is you build it on a number of C's, and you have these different C's that lay out the different aspects of community and what is necessary to think about as you're pursuing different aspects of community. What is there one of those, because you have here, everything from companionship to commiseration, connection, commitment, then you go into even courage and community. Is there one there that we would find maybe opening this book that might be a little unexpected, that wouldn't be standard, that maybe was especially meaningful to you in a certain way?
There is a chapter specifically on this idea of communication that I think we often don't consider when we have relationships. We might consider, how do I communicate with my boss? How do I communicate with my parents? But we don't often sit down and say, okay, what's it like to be on the receiving end of me? And how do I communicate better with my friends based on our experiences, and really taking the time to communicate clearly what people mean to you and not leaving things in vagueness and fog. I think one of the ways friendships naturally end is that we just don't communicate, that say we're busy, and we just ghost them. We disappear, and then later on we're like, ooh, I feel really bad about that, but I don't know what to do. So you just keep ignoring it, and then the friendship kind of fizzles out.
Yeah.
I think that there is a really important and necessary conversation that we need to have with our friends. And that is, and it doesn't need to be big and scary. It's not like we sit down with them, but I think our friends should always know what we think about them. I think that they should always know that they're cared for, that they're loved, that they're seen, that if there's a moment of tension or a disagreement, you say, hey, did I read this wrong? I would love to just make sure, because that stuff can take root and really ruin the friendship, right? If something goes wrong at the root, it just falls apart. And so I think really taking the time to be intentional and to maintain by communicating clearly to somebody, hey, I have a really busy couple of months coming up. And because of that, I feel like I'm going to be kind of sparse as a friend, but I want you to know, like, I love you and I can't wait to see you in another month if they're like trying to plan something and you don't have time on your calendar. But communicating that instead of just saying, no, sorry, can't get together this week, say something like, I can't get together this week, but it's a really busy season and I would love to see you. So maybe we can plan for something a little further down the road.
Yeah.
And just that gives them reassurance that you're not avoiding them, that you don't hate them. And it also allows for us to like walk confidently into conversations, hangouts, and time with friends because there's not anything being unsaid, which I think is really it gives us a lot of confidence and it gives us steady ground in our friendships, which then builds trust.
Yeah, that's really practical. I'm so reminded of a friend and I just had this happen where we would consider ourselves pretty close friends, and we just reached out only on each other's birthdays and had a huge chasm of time in between. And finally, when it was my turn to reach out for the birthday, we had to acknowledge that, okay, we have both just been in really weird seasons and we feel awkward that we are this close of friends and we are not communicating. And so we had to just kind of clear the air and acknowledge that, okay, we let time pass. We didn't make an effort to get together this entire summer. We just saw each other the other night. And so it was like kind of resetting and just saying, okay, that's what it was. Let's say we both are still valuable to each other and let's acknowledge that and just realize, like you said, that, okay, stuff happens and it just, you have to be okay with that time passes and we can't reclaim that time and we can't act like it, that it wasn't what it was.
Yeah.
So I think that's really great. Okay, Melissa, as we finish out here, you were telling me before we started taping that you actually, at the time of this taping, now when this airs, you will have actually gotten married. So you
That's
have
wild.
you have a book on singleness and community. Now you're married. People are going to listen and they're going to be like, oh, of course. Well, now she just got married. Or they're going to put some weird thing on it like, that she just invested in community for singles and then God rewarded her with marriage. Okay, what does it look like for
Absolutely not.
you looking forward for all your single friends that are going to say, she is going to ditch me like a bad habit now that she's married? How are you going to have to intentionally really look at marriage as a good thing and still preserve those relationships that you have?
This is something that my fiance and I talk about pretty often, actually, is how do we honor our single friends? Because we have both been single well into our mid-30s. And because of that, we know what it feels like when one more person gets engaged or one more person, gets married and then they disappear. And that can be really hard. And I think sometimes there is an unspoken thing that happens with married and single people. In fact, this book originally I wanted to title it Dear Married Friends, and it was a book for married people on how to befriend singles because I really believe that we can all be friends. And so that's how this kind of idea started, right? But I think when we talk about how do we want our single friends to feel loved, I think it's just pausing and saying, okay, who can we bring into our house for dinner? What does it look like to reach out and ask someone, hey, how's work going? How's that difficult situation? How's your family doing? And to really, regardless of relationship status, just to continue to be so intentional with that. That's something we talked about from the very beginning. And when we got engaged, we had a moment where he prayed with me after we got engaged and very tearfully, both of us said to the Lord, thank you. Thank you for all of our years of singleness and the beautiful communities you've built, and help us to build that community together now in a way that honors you and dignifies single people's experience. And so I think just the intentionality is something that we're going to carry, and also just not making it weird. Honestly, I think sometimes people make it weird and all of a sudden they're like, well, I don't want to hang out with you and your spouse because you're probably just like doing married people stuff and I'm just a single rando now. And it's like, hold on. Like, we're the same people. There's just two of us. And now I have to figure out how to share one bathroom with two people. So it's one of those things where it doesn't change who we are, and we choose to see our relationship, and I'm really thankful for this, as a thing but not the thing.
Yeah.
And I think that we so often in the church say marriage is the thing, marriage is the goal. And when we do that and turn it into this idol, you get that goal and then you realize, wait a minute, still a fallen person, still struggling with insecurity, still dealing with all the same things I did before I had a ring on my finger.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the transition into marriage, my prayer, our prayer, and kind of the goal is to say nothing fundamentally changes in my DNA when I get married. I still get to love my single friends, and I don't have to do a whole big weird preamble every time I talk to them. I can just treat them like regular people, and that's what this book is about. We're all just people, and we're all just figuring it out.
That's so great. So, well, friends, we've been talking with Melissa Zaldivar, and the book is Get Over Here. I mentioned that a couple times already, a singles guide to building meaningful community. Melissa, thanks again for being part of this conversation, for penning the book, for encouraging us, and for being someone who really wants community and not only wants it, but makes it happen.
Thanks so much.